Hello everyone, it's Dale here. I'm going to do a video about Flashpoint basketball. Now, Jason's been playing the game over the last couple of weeks. 3 or 4 videos he's put up. They've been great to watch. First one, he basically sat down, going through the rules, learning it, playing it. Had it worked out after a couple of sessions of rolling it. Rolling with it and learning as he went. So it's been great. It's been great watching it happen. Now, some of the confusion, and I can understand why it would be. And I guess I wanted to work through some of that. He mentions while he's playing about how how the game contained a lot. Yeah, subtly nuanced, with the mechanic, and like 2 pages of rules here, which I got them up like page 3 and page 4 is what he's primarily referencing. But there's the optional rule on page 5 is what I want to kind of mainly address here. Now, the basic game we'll walk through here real quick is, both teams roll a dice. The die number that comes up will be the primary player on that side. Now, I've listed here from bench, power forward, shooting guard, center, small forward, point guard, down the line. But you can just put a player name. You could do, whatever you want to. But for the simplicity reasons, I just laid them out like this. Now, the base game I made to be an aid basically in learning it. As far as like getting over that learning curve of understanding the mechanism, the mechanic, which like Jason said, once you understand it, it becomes intuitive once you know what you're looking at. But it's very hard to translate that to paper and have somebody pick up. The game could be dead in the water if they pick it up and can't understand how it's done. So, but Jason's been great at pointing out and describing how the game is played for anybody who's watched along. So I think they got a pretty good grasp of it. But we'll give it really quick here. Like when the die, you just roll in 2d6, 1d6 for each team. For each segment, there's 5 segments in a quarter, 20 segments, 4 quarters per game. So it's basically a contested roll for each segment. And when you roll the dice, you use colored dice like Jason does, and the dice, when they come up, the value of the dice will point to a person or a position or what have you that is mainly scoring or mainly, highlighting, or the attention. They're doing the most of the work that segment, right? So all the points are awarded to them, and you just write it down, their name on the segment or their position or whatever, and that's by the end of the game you'll know how much they made as opposed to like how many times their numbers popped up. Now the mechanic itself says when you roll a dice, it tells you the position, who's active the segment. Position belongs to a player, which they do have a role, a star, or a superstar. Role is just the basic role, the position they're playing. Just a game term. So, but those just align to show you how because the game has, while you're playing, these contested roles can yield a highlight moment. Basically, it comes down to, especially in the base game, the higher value on the 2 contested dice. Like if somebody gets a 4, it's higher than a 3. Say it's 4 to 3, then typically they're going to get the highlight chip or tick. In the game here, I've put in a little box here where you see, look, heat tick boxes. So whether you're bench or just writing the player's name, and whether their role, which I meant to put that's a P, it should be an R. But anyway, and star and the superstar. So it'll let you know, and I generally keep these heat boxes. Once I find out through the team creation what the center right here is, if he's a star, but if you're a regular role on the 3rd box, I'll just put a little circle around this 3rd box, and every time you get a highlight, you'll tick it off, And then when you get that third box, he'll get a heat level 1. Now Jason's been using tokens and just trading them in. It's kind of like Monopoly, where you get the 3 houses and then switch it out for a hotel. That's what we're doing here. But when you have that hotel, it translates to points on the scoreboard. Now I'll explain a little bit about that later. Now roll just has the opportunity to get the heat level 1. Star can on the third box can get the heat level 1, and on the 5th box can get the heat level 2, which translates to 2 points. Okay. Superstars can get the heat level 1 on the 2nd box they tick, and heat level 2 on the 4th box they tick. So they get there faster and can affect the game more dramatically. Now, go back up here. Okay. What the specific player is the one who scores the segment points. Yes, attributed to them in that segment if they, for each side, both of them get point. Get a heat tick if you win the highlight. Like I said, if you get the higher score, generally you'll get the highlight. Applies a heat level to the segment score. I give a little example here about how that works. You check, but right here it says check for a tie. Now if both die come up, say 2 3s, like both are 3s, then there is no attacker and there's no defender. So this is why I say each team scores the die itself. There's no highlight, and you move on to the next segment. So 3 and 3 or 4 and 4. There's no higher dice, which would make it the attack die, and no lower value dice, which would make it the defense die. Okay, so normally when you're playing here, you'll roll, like I said, the attacker dies, the higher die is the attacker, lower die is the defender. You calculate your base points. Both teams add the same margin to their own dice. All right, margin is the difference between the dice. One dice is 6, the other is 3. There's a 3 difference between them, so all of a sudden you got 6 plus 3, which is the margin, and 3 plus 3. So you got 9 to 6. That was how number 3 player got 6 points and number 6 player got 9 points in that exchange. Now the player with the higher number gets the highlight tick. We go back down here and see that if they would have got it, say if it was a center, they would have got a highlight tick. Boop. And it got closer to the point of whenever they trigger their heat level. So, go. Okay, so each scores die result plus their margin. Again, both teams add the same margin to their own die result. I repeat it the same way. Give an example here. 6 versus 4, margin of 2. 6 plus 8 to 6. That's the defender. That's how it usually susses out, especially at the start of the game. You compare heat levels. Now this is levels. It's not a highlight heat tick. It's when a player will have a heat, then this could potentially change the game. Look at the attacker's heat level and the defender's heat level. These levels could be 0. They could not matter. It could be a moot point. Keep that in mind because I'll elaborate that on a little bit. It could be a moot point. In the base game, no heat level. Then we just go back to the who had the higher roll, right? The attacker's heat is higher, then they're going to get the offensive highlight. But let me tell you, they don't have to have heat. They're going to get it anyway, just from having a higher value. The other thing is the defender's heat is higher, greater than the attacker heat. This is where the situation changes. Any kind of heat, when we're dealing with heat, whether you're heat level 1 or heat level 2, it translates to points. If the attacker which is the higher value dice, has a heat level greater than or the same, if equal, it's still an offensive highlight. They will get a tick. Even if they get a tick and it ignites their heat level to 1, they immediately add that 1 to the score, which back up here, 6 to 4. Let's say 6 had a heat level of 1 versus 4, margin of 2. Then the attacker would have 9. They would add their heat level to it. Now, the defender, let's say this same 6 versus 4 up here in this example, say this 4 had a heat level of 1. He had already triggered it off, right? You look at that situation and you go, okay, the heat just trumped the higher die. So now the situation is, it's a defensive highlight. The defender will immediately get a tick on it, and he will add his 1 point if he's at heat level 1, or 2 points if it's at 2. Or it shouldn't say add. He deducts it from the attacker dice. So it's a defensive highlight, but you remove the heat level value from the attacker. So in this case, it would be 6 to 7. The attacker's still the attacker. The defender just schooled him a little bit and knocked him down 1 point. That's that being that if he had heat level 1, right? If he just had heat ticks, it wouldn't mess with anything. It's literally when you get a heat level, then all of a sudden you can trump and you can hit a defender. As a defender, you can take the win out of an attacker who would normally win these, back and forth. Now, knowing this, and up here I just go apply the heat effect, just like I described. When heat levels, defensive highlight, the defender gains 1 heat tick, decrease the attacker's segment score by the defender's heat level. Only the attacker's score is changed by heat in the game. Defender keeps their base score. Add points to the scoreboard, repeat until 20 segments are complete. After 20 segments, team with the highest score wins. Okay? If you get a tie, just go for another segment. Okay? The golden bucket. Now that's the base game. Now as we can see here, the heat doesn't even really come into play until these moments when people have heat levels, or players have heat levels, doesn't come into play until the second half of the game. When people have built up heat ticks to be able to trigger heat levels, to be in a position where you can have a defensive highlight. Until then, you're really not even having to use any kind of mental capacity to think about anything other than like the higher die level wins it. This is done purposely because I want people to learn the mechanic, get easy with it, and then you can pepper this defensive, he just did a defensive highlight, and have a little bit of that, probably maybe 5 times or so in a game, at max, at the end of a regular game, whenever you're, playing the base game. That's what this is. Now here is the game changer. And this can be expanded in any kind of way because no matter how you apply this optional rule here, the tier tie break, it can change the game to where all of a sudden you're having defensive highlights throughout, out of the gate, throughout the whole game. This adds a bit of overhead awareness that you can be cognitively aware that when you're rolling dice, if one player is a star, they're going to beat a player who's a roll. Now earlier, whenever I said, I'll get back there. You could use this, the heat levels are equal, compare player types. Okay. This simply means, I said the heat levels are equal is because heat trumps player types, it trumps anything. If you've got a greater heat, it's going to trump anything. But what this subtly does down here, the superstar beats star, star beats roll, when you say like, look, if the heat level isn't an issue, you simply go to here, right? So if the heat levels are equal, and this could be 0 heat to 0 heat, you compare the player types, which is superstar beats star, star beats roll. Now this is out of the gate. You're going to be starting the game, and you have to pay attention to if there's a superstar beating a roll. And at roll, if he rolled a 6 and you get a superstar to hit it 2, all of a sudden you got a defensive highlight. Now, there's going to be a defensive highlight. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a negative point, but you're going to get a defensive highlight to tick it off to get the defender up to heat. Once he gets to a heat level, then he can apply his heat level to subtract from the attacker's die roll if that's the case, or either if he's the attacker, it'll add to his if he gets that heat level. But all of a sudden, you have the lower numbers if they are stars or superstars stealing the highlights from the higher die rolls. That is pretty much what the base game is predicated on, at least certainly throughout the first half of the game. This changes the whole game. It is a game changer. So throughout the whole game, if you add this optional rule to it in full, you're going to be looking at stars, be superstars. The only time you stop that, right, is if the heat levels are not equal. Then it goes back to heat levels. All right, so if the heat levels are not equal, whoever has the greatest heat level wins it. If they are equal, if they're 1 and 1 or 0 and 0, you go to rolls. This all of a sudden brings superstar and star. This is intuitive in play, because somebody would think, oh, a superstar is going to beat out this, or he's going to steal the ball or whatever. It's just more overhead, and that's why I put it in as an optional rule, because to even get to that point, yeah, you got to be well versed or used to playing on a base level, but that's where you get to. Now, I do want to point out a little bit that I didn't really, when I did this up here, the check for tie on step 2, if both dice are the same, each team scores the die number, no highlights, right? Now, you can easily say, you can apply this. I did this for the base game, but you can certainly do the optional rules and add it to it. I tried to make low overhead as far as like the thank you parts and just say 3 versus 3, but you can certainly add if 2 dice are the same. Now, one of them isn't the attacker and one of them isn't the defender. In this situation, like I said, that was why I put it that way, because both dice are the same. There's no higher dice to be the attacking dice and no lower dice to be a defender dice, so you couldn't have attacker or defender highlights, right? But you could certainly, if you wanted to, incorporate that into here. Like if you had 2 ties and 2 tie dice, 2 3s or whatever, and one of them had a heat, they get a highlight, because a highlight is a chip, basically. It doesn't have to be defined as defense or offense. Or you could say, hey, if one of them's a superstar over the star, then give them the chip. This accelerates the fact that there's ticks. When I say chips, I'm using what Jason said, or is using, right? Which he substituted for what I had put on the paper as ticks. Throw in a little chip. It still gets a player to heat quicker. So if you put in the ties, if you apply it to that, and you can even, if you have a heat level and it's a tie, if you got 3 and 3, take that one and you got a heat level 1, one player does. See, this is where there's no attacker or no defender. You could add it to the attacker or reduce it to the other. That'd be player's choice. But there's no clear definitive way of saying like what would automatically do. Might say just add it, or reduce. So But that's why the tie is like it is, and it could be left alone, right where it is, or you could just give highlights without alterations, or you could add the heat. The beauty of it is none of it breaks the game. The more you add to it, the more dynamic it gets, and but there is more overhead. But once you learn the base game and get it, whenever you plug in that optional rule, the optional tier rule, that's how it changes play. That's how it changes play. So, um, yeah, more power to you. If you do it, but do it sparingly and to to how you want to enjoy, to your enjoyment of it. If it causes too much overhead, just reduce it. Because all we're doing is just making different the dynamism. But you're going to have a lot more heat tokens pop up, and a lot more of heat ticks go off and heat levels pop up, and getting the heat quicker if you use this optional rule. They'll be dropping all over the place. And counters and star beats roll or superstar beats star defensive plays will come into play a lot more. So it elevates the game in that way. It's just you got to be well versed in the mechanic to understand it, and then it just adds the overhead of trying to recognize what they are. But the way Jason lays out the cards like that, the little 3x5 cards with each player on it, and you can just cross reference, you can immediately see it. You know, see if it's defensive. Highlight, like I said, they'll get the highlight. They only apply negative points whenever they have a heat level, but they'll still get that highlight. You know, which works for them in the future. So anyway, I'll stop babbling. If anybody have any further questions, yeah, just ask me. All right, take care.